Welcome to Back on the Stack, a cEDH channel. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe to show your support. Another way to support us is to check out our Bonfire site, where we have a great selection of wearables with our rad logo. Now, let's get right into it and see what decks are being piloted tonight.
Hey, this is Ian from the YouTube channel ComedIan MTG. You can find me over on YouTube at ComedIan MTG. You can also find me on Twitter at ComedIan MTG. I am a professional cEDH coach and YouTuber. Today you can find me playing Silas Dargo. Silas Dargo is a fun combination of some of the more broken Grixis packages we see using things like Necropotence, Necrodominance, Adnaz, and stuff like that, while also playing into some really cool Dargo synergies that you get in black. You have a bunch of really unique creatures that you get to sacrifice for, as well as using things like Burnt Offering for really large amounts of mana afterwards, and combos with things like Altar of Dementia and Bergi and stuff like that.
Hey guys, I'm Jordan, the newest addition to the team. Tonight I'll be playing Thrasios. This is a fast tuner list looking to pull out one of the many ways to make infinite mana, then to activate Thrasios to draw our entire deck. I've decided to keep this 6 because it allows me to generate enough mana to be able to activate Thrasios turn 2 if I don't draw on anything to cast.
Hey everybody, it's Eli, and tonight I'm piloting Derevi, Imperial Tactician. This is a super fun Bant list that seeks to win through infinite mana loops with Derevi, or through loops with Nadu and Nomad's Encore. I'm also running a light stacks package to try and slow the rest of the board down, because Derevi is inherently a slower deck than a lot of the format is right now. But I've been having a lot of fun with it, and excited to play it on the channel tonight. I mulled down to 5 in seat 3. It gives me a turn 1 Esper Sentinel. Hopefully I can draw some cards off of it, get out Archivist, get out that Blind Obedience, start slowing down the game, and find a win through all of that card draw.
What's going on, guys? Spuki here, piloting my version of Blue Farm. Today we're looking at a hand that is hopefully going to land an early Rhystic Study. We have this top deck tutor on turn 1 into the Rhystic. We'll see how it goes.
With introductions out of the way, Ian will kick us off. He draws and plays Mana Confluence. He casts Lion's Eye Diamond. He casts Vexing Bauble. He moves through phases and passes. Jordan draws and also plays Mana Confluence. He casts Mana Vault. He casts Relic of Legend. He casts Birds of Paradise. He passes. Eli draws and plays Marsh Flats for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, fetches up a Savannah to the battlefield. He casts Esper Sentinel. He passes. Spuki draws and plays Bloodstained Mire. He pays a life, sacks it, fetches up Underground Sea to the battlefield. He casts Imperial Seal. Esper triggers and Eli draws. It resolves and Spuki tutors a card to the top of his library, loses 2 life, and passes the turn. Ian draws and plays Spire of Industry for turn. He casts Dark Ritual. Esper triggers and Eli draws. Dark Writ resolves and Ian adds 3 black to his mana pool. He casts Beseech the Mirror. He holds priority and cracks his LED, adding 3 black mana to his pool, discarding his hand, which is a grinding station. Beseech resolves and he tutors a card into exile face down. He puts the card to hand and then casts Necropotence. It resolves and he pays 10 life to exile the top 10 cards. He moves to end step and puts the Necro cards to hand. He discards the hand size and passes the turn. Jordan draws and plays Flooded Strand for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, fetches up Tropical Island to the battlefield. He dashes in Ragavan. He moves to combat and swings Ragavan at Ian. Ragavan triggers on damage, Jordan creates a treasure token, and Ian exiles the top card of his library, which is Underworld Breach. In his second main phase, he casts his commander, Thrasios. He moves to his end step, and Ragavan is returned to his hand. The turn moves to Eli. Eli draws and plays Gemstone Caverns as land for turn. He casts Blind Obedience. He moves to combat and swings Esper at Ian. He takes it. Eli then moves through phases and passes the turn. Spuki draws and plays Arid Mesa for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Plateau to the battlefield. He casts Soul Ring. Esper triggers and Eli draws. Soul Ring then enters tapped due to Blind Obedience. He casts Mockingbird, where X equals 0. It ETBs and he has it become a copy of Esper Sentinel. He passes. Ian skips his draw step due to Necro. He plays Underground Sea for turn. He sacrifices Vexing Bauble to draw a card. He casts Ragavan. He casts Mox Amber. Both Espers trigger and both Spuki and Eli draw. He casts Lotus Petal. He pays 3 life into Necro, exiling the top 3 cards. He moves to his end step, putting the Necro cards to hand. With a full mid of 7, he passes. Jordan draws and plays Emergent Zone as land for turn. He casts his own Ragavan. He casts Rhystic Study. Both Espers trigger and he pays for Eli's, but Spuki gets to draw. Rhystic resolves and he passes the turn. Eli draws and plays Flooded Strand. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Underground Sea to the battlefield. He casts Kraum Mox. Ristic and Esper both trigger, and both Jordan and Spuki draw. EDTBs, and he imprints Thrasios. He casts his commander, Derevi. Ristic triggers, and Jordan draws. Derevi ETBs, and Eli untaps his Kraum Mox. He moves to combat and swings Esper at Ian. He takes the damage. Derevi triggers, and Eli untaps his Savannah. He moves through phases and passes. Spuki draws and casts Gamble. Ristic and Esper both trigger, and both Jordan and Eli draw. With Gamble on the stack, Eli flashes in Archivist of Ogma. Ristic triggers, and Jordan draws. Then Gamble resolves, and Spuki tutors a card into his hand. He randomly discards Orcish Bowmasters. Then Eli gains a life and draws a card from Archivist's Delayed Trigger. Spuki plays City of Traders. He casts Kraum Mox. Ristic triggers, and he pays. It ETBs, and he imprints Wheel of Misfortune. He casts Lotus Petal. Ristic triggers, and he pays. He moves through phases, and in response, Ian casts Vampiric Tutor. Both Espers and Ristic trigger, and all opponents draw. It resolves, and he tutors a card to the top of his library and loses 2 life. Then Eli gains a life and draws a card from Archivist's Delayed Trigger. The turn then moves to Ian. Ian skips his draw step due to Necro. He plays Forbidden Orchard for turn. He casts his commander, Silas Wren. Ristic triggers, and Jordan draws. He pays 3 life into Necro, exiling the top 3 cards. He moves to his end step, placing the Necro cards to hand. He discards to hand size and passes. Jordan draws and plays Arid Mesa. He moves to combat and declares Ragavan at Spuki. Ragavan triggers on damage, Jordan creates a treasure token, and Spuki exiles the top card of his library, which is a Blood Crypt. He moves through phases, and in response, Eli casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Gemstone Caverns as an additional cost. Esper and Ristic both trigger, and Eli pays for neither. However, in response to the draw triggers, Ian flashes in Orcish Bowmasters, tapping Forbidden Orchard and giving a 1/1 spirit to Spuki. In response, Jordan casts Veil of Summer. Both Espers trigger, and both Spuki and Eli draw. Veil resolves, and Jordan draws a card. Then Bowmasters resolves. It ETBs, and Ian has it ping Eli's Esper. Then Spuki draws from his Delayed Trigger. Bowmaster triggers, and Ian has it ping Spuki's Esper. Then Jordan draws, and Ian has Bowmaster put 1 damage on Archivist. With Crop Rotation back on the stack, Jordan casts Flare of Duplication, sacrificing Ragavan as an alternative cost, targeting Crop Rot. Jordan then resolves his copy of Crop Rot first and tutors Gaia's Cradle to the battlefield. Then Eli gains a life and draws a card from his Archivist's Delayed Trigger. Bowmaster triggers, and Ian pings Archivist for lethal. Then the original copy of Crop Rotation resolves, and Eli tells the table that he actually drew his Gaia's Cradle through Archivist, so he tutors Command Tower to the battlefield. The turn then moves to Eli. Eli draws and plays Gaia's Cradle. He casts Mockingbird, where X equals 1. Ristic triggers, and he pays. It ETBs, and he has it become a copy of Orcish Bowmasters. It ETBs, and he targets Ian's copy of Bowmasters with the 1 damage. In response, Ian casts Chain of Vapor, targeting his own Bowmaster. Ristic triggers here, but unfortunately the entire table missed it. Ian's Bowmaster is bounced, and since Eli's Bowmaster did not do any damage to a target, he does not get to amass an Orc army. Eli casts Noble Hierarch. Ristic triggers, and Jordan draws. Bowmaster triggers, and Eli targets Jordan's Bop. In response, Jordan casts Pyroblast, targeting Derevi. It resolves, returning Derevi to the command zone. The Bowmaster ping kills Bop, and Eli masses an army. He moves through phases and passes. Spuki draws and casts Mystic Remora. Ristic triggers, and he pays. He plays Ancient Tomb as land for turn. City of Traders triggers, and he sacrifices it. He casts his commander, Kraum, Ludovit's Opus. Ristic triggers, and he pays. He moves through phases and passes the turn. Ian skips his draw step due to Necro. He casts Demonic Tutor. Mystic and Ristic both trigger, and both Spuki and Jordan draw. Bowmaster triggers for each, and Eli sends both the pings at Thrasios. Then D-Tutor resolves, and Ian tutors a card to hand. Ian moves to combat and swings Ragavan at Spuki. He declares the 1/1 Spirit token as a blocker, and they trade. Ian pays 2 life into Necro, exiling the top 2 cards. He moves to his end step, placing the Necro cards to hand. He moves to his cleanup phase, and in response, Jordan pays 1 life, sacks his Arid Mesa, and fetches a Volcanic Island to the battlefield. Still in response, Jordan flashes in Hullbreaker Horror. Still in the end step, Eli casts Worldly Tutor. Fish and Ristic both trigger, and he doesn't pay. Spuki draws first, Bowmaster triggers, and Eli sends the damage at Thrasios for lethal. Then Jordan draws, and Eli sends the Bowmaster damage at Hullbreaker. Then Worldly Tutor resolves, and Eli tutors Emil the Blessed to the top of his library. The turn then moves to Jordan. Jordan draws and plays Breeding Pool for turn, shocking it in. He casts Eternal Witness. Hullbreaker triggers, and he targets Mystic Remora to be returned to Spuki's hand. Then Ewit ETBs, and he targets Flare of Duplication. In response, Ian casts Tainted Pact. Rhystic triggers and Jordan draws. Bowmaster triggers and Eli puts 1 damage on Hullbreaker. Then, Tainted Pact resolves and Ian exiles cards from the top of his library and decides to stop at Red Elemental Blast, putting it to hand. Still in response to the Ewit trigger, Ian casts the REB, targeting Hullbreaker. Kraum and Rhystic both trigger and both Spuki and Jordan draw. Bowmaster triggers and Eli sends both pings at Hullbreaker. In response to the REB, Jordan casts Chain of Vapor, targeting his own mana vault. Hullbreaker triggers and he targets the REB on the stack. Kraum triggers and Spuki draws. Eli sends 1 more damage at Hullbreaker. REB is then sent back to Ian's hand, but still in response, Ian exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand to add 1 red mana to recast the Red Elemental Blast. Rhystic triggers and he doesn't pay. Eli has Bowmaster ping Hullbreaker for a 5th time. In response to REB, Jordan cast Archdruid's Charm, choosing the first mode. Hullbreaker triggers and he again targets the REB to be sent back to Ian's hand. Then Archdruid Charm resolves and Jordan tutors Dockside Extortionist to hand. Then Chain of Vapor resolves and Mana Vault is bounced back to his hand. Then Flare of Duplication is returned from his graveyard to his hand. Jordan casts Crow Mox. Hullbreaker triggers and he bounces Blind Obedience. Crow Mox ETBs and he imprints Flare of Duplication. He casts Dockside. Hullbreaker triggers and he targets his Eternal Witness. In response to the trigger, Ian casts Force of Will, targeting Dockside and exiling Thassa's Oracle. Rhystic triggers and Jordan draws. Bowmaster triggers and Eli pings the Eternal Witness. In response to Force, Jordan casts his own Force of Will for its alternative casting cost, exiling Tezzeret the Seeker. Hullbreaker triggers and he targets Eli's copy of Bowmasters. Jordan's Force then counters Ian's, Dockside ETPs, and Jordan creates 6 treasures. He casts Delighted Halfling and bounces Dockside to hand through Hullbreaker. He then presents a loop of making infinite treasures with this loop. He casts his commander, Thrasios. He activates Thrasios, drawing his deck, casting all of his creatures, and then casting Finale of Devastation, where X equals 1 billion. He swings his buffed up hasty creatures for lethal, and Jordan wins the game. The group had a great time jamming some cEDH with ComedIan MTG tonight. It was an awesome game with good interaction, but in the end, a Hullbreaker horror proved too powerful to play through for the table, and our newest team member, Jordan, got his first win on the channel. We all want to give a special thanks to Ian for hanging out and piloting his unique Grixis list. Check out all of our deck links listed below, and we will see you back on the stack.
I'll just grab Command Tower. We'll mana fix. I feel like colored mana is better than just mana armor right now. Okay.
The Fortnite one? Come on.